You'd think buying your dream home meant peace, but for me, it meant war. I still remember the day I signed the papers like it was yesterday. The realtor slid the documents across the oak conference table with a smile so wide I swore her cheeks must have hurt. "Congratulations," she said, tapping the last page where my signature rested. "You're officially a homeowner." At 59, after a career in teaching and years of renting cramped apartments, that phrase lit me up inside. Finally, I wasn't just passing through. I had roots, a yard, a front porch, a place where my grandchildren could visit and chase fireflies in the summer. The house itself wasn't extravagant. A modest two-story with faded blue shutters, a squeaky screen door, and a yard that needed a little TLC. But the moment I stepped inside, it wrapped around me like a quilt. The smell of fresh paint, the sunlight pooling through the living room window, the faint creak of the stairs, every sound whispered, "This is yours." What I didn't realize was that hidden behind those perfect little suburban scenes was something darker, a force I hadn't bargained for, a force that would turn my quiet dream into a slow-burn nightmare. The HOA. Now, I'd heard about HOAs before, who hasn't? But I figured it was just about keeping lawns mowed and houses from falling apart. Harmless, right? Little did I know, I'd stepped into a neighborhood controlled by an HOA president who treated the community less like neighbors and more like her personal kingdom. Her name was Karen. And trust me, she lived up to every inch of that stereotype. The first time I met her, I was on my knees in the front yard, pulling weeds. Sweat dripped down my forehead, dirt under my nails, and for once in a long time, I felt content. That's when I heard the sharp click of heels on pavement. "Excuse me," a voice rang out. Sharp, clipped. I turned to see a woman in her late 50s, standing with her arms crossed, a clipboard tucked against her chest, perfectly ironed khakis, pastel cardigan, pearls at her throat like she'd walked straight out of a country club commercial. "You must be the new homeowner," she said, her lips curling into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I stood, brushing dirt from my knees. "That's me. Name's David." She extended her hand, but her grip was cold, more like a business transaction than a neighborly greeting. "Karen," she said, "President of the HOA. Welcome to Maplewood Estates." I thanked her, expecting the usual small talk, maybe an invitation to a neighborhood barbecue. Instead, she pulled out a paper from her clipboard. "This is the HOA handbook. Everything you need to know about living here. Lawn maintenance, exterior paint colors, holiday decoration limits, pet regulations, everything's outlined." I blinked. "Oh, thanks." She gave me a once-over, her eyes flicking to the flower bed, then back to me. "And just so you're aware, we have a strict policy against garden gnomes. They're considered unsightly." I laughed, thinking she was joking. But the way she held my gaze unflinching, serious, made my chuckle die in my throat. "Right," I said carefully. "No gnomes." She smiled again, tight and polished. "Good. We take pride in keeping this community beautiful. As long as you follow the rules, we won't have any problems." And with that, she turned and walked away, heels clicking like a judge's gavel. That was my introduction to Karen. For a few weeks, things were quiet. I settled in, unpacked boxes, painted the guest room. I met a few neighbors, sweet retirees, young couples with kids, the kind of people you wave to when you collect the mail. But every time I started to feel comfortable, I'd catch a glimpse of Karen, patrolling the sidewalks with her clipboard like a prison warden. At first, I brushed it off. Every neighborhood has a busybody, right? Someone who takes things too seriously. But then came the letters. The first one arrived tucked under my doormat. A notice in bold letters: "Violation grass height exceeds limit." I stared at it in disbelief. My lawn had barely grown past an inch. I'd mowed it just days before. The second letter scolded me for leaving my trash cans at the curb too long. The third, for having a wind chime on my porch. Each notice came with a threat. Failure to correct violations may result in fines. It felt less like a community and more like a dictatorship. And Karen was the dictator. I tried reasoning with her once. At an HOA meeting in the clubhouse, I raised my hand and politely asked, "Why such strict rules on something as harmless as a wind chime?" Karen's smile was thin, her voice syrupy sweet but edged with steel. Rules are rules, David. If we let one person break them, chaos follows. Some neighbors shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but no one spoke up. It was like they were afraid of her. That's when I realized this wasn't just about rules. This was about control. Karen thrived on it. She fed off it. And she had the entire board wrapped around her finger. That night, lying awake in my new home, I stared at the ceiling and wondered, had I made a mistake? Was this dream house worth the nightmare that came with it? I didn't know it yet, but Karen wasn't done. The lawn notices and trash can scoldings were just the beginning. What came next would push me further than I ever imagined. And it would set me on a path toward revenge I never thought I was capable of. What would you have done if your dream home suddenly came with a tyrant attached? Let me know in the comments. If Chapter 1 of my new life was settling into my dream home, then Chapter 2 was waking up to the nightmare of Karen's obsession. It started small, so small I thought I could laugh it off. But you know how a dripping faucet seems harmless at first? Then, after hours of listening to that relentless plink, 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 it begins to gnaw at your sanity? That was Karen. The morning after the first violation notice, I decided to handle things with good humor. I pushed my mower across the yard until the grass looked like a golf course fairway. Perfectly neat, crisp. I even trimmed around the mailbox and the edges of the driveway. When I finished, I stood back with my hands on my hips. There, I thought. Let's see her try to complain about this. But Karen didn't need a reason. She just needed an opportunity. 2 days later, I came home from grocery shopping to find another notice pinned to my front door. Violation. Trash cans visible from street. I froze, groceries slipping in my arms. My cans weren't at the curb, they were tucked neatly against the side of the garage. Apparently, that wasn't good enough. The notice included a line that burned into my brain. All trash receptacles must be stored out of sight. Failure to comply will result in a $50 fine. $50 for a trash can. I remember storming inside, tossing the letter on the counter, and muttering, "She's got to be kidding me." But it didn't stop there. Oh no. The next week, I was sipping coffee on my porch when a sharp knock rattled the screen door. I opened it to find Karen herself, clipboard clutched like a weapon. "Morning, David," she said, her tone sweet as saccharin. "I couldn't help but notice your mailbox paint is chipping." He blinked. "Mailbox paint?" "Yes," she said firmly. Regulation 14B. All exterior fixtures must be maintained in pristine condition. That includes mailboxes. You'll need to repaint it by next week. Black, of course. Only black. I stared at her, incredulous. My mailbox had a faint scratch, nothing more. "With all due respect, don't you think that's a little—" "Rules are rules," she cut in, her smile tightening. "We must maintain uniformity. Wouldn't want the neighborhood looking shabby." And with that, she turned and strode off, heels clicking like a metronome, marking my growing frustration. I tried to laugh it off again, but soon I noticed a pattern. No matter what I did, Karen found something wrong. One afternoon, I strung a set of solar-powered fairy lights along my back fence. Just a small touch to make evenings cozier. The very next morning, another violation notice. Unapproved exterior lighting. When I planted a few daffodils by the walkway. Unauthorized landscaping modification. Even my welcome mat, an innocent rectangle that said "Home Sweet Home," earned me a verbal warning because it was not HOA approved. It felt less like home ownership and more like living under surveillance. And the craziest part, I started noticing her watching me. Sometimes, I'd glance out my window and catch her standing at the corner, clipboard in hand, eyes narrowed behind her sunglasses. Other times, she'd drive slowly past my house in her silver Lexus, craning her neck to inspect the property like she was auditing it. I'd never experienced anything like it. A grown man retired, independent, proud, reduced to second-guessing whether he could hang a bird feeder without permission. I vented to a neighbor once, a kind woman named Linda who lived 2 doors down. She leaned closer and whispered, "You're not the first. Karen's been running this HOA like a dictatorship for years. Most of us are too tired to fight." I frowned. "So, everyone just lets her walk all over them?" Linda sighed. "It's easier that way. Fighting her, well, you'll see. She doesn't play fair." Her warning rattled in my chest. But I wasn't built to roll over. Not after years of teaching kids how to stand up for themselves. Still, I decided to pick my battles carefully. For a while, I followed every rule to the letter. Trash cans hidden. Mailbox painted. No fairy lights. No daffodils. No welcome mat. I became a ghost of the homeowner. I wanted to be afraid to put my own stamp on the place. But here's the thing about bullies. When you give in, they don't stop. They just push harder. And Karen was about to push me past my breaking point. It started with the dog. See, my daughter sometimes dropped off her golden retriever, Max, when she worked long shifts. Max was a gentle soul, the kind of dog who wouldn't hurt a fly. He loved napping under the oak tree, chasing butterflies, and wagging his tail at anyone who passed by. One sunny Saturday, I was tossing a ball for him in the yard when Karen marched over. "David," she said, her tone clipped. "Do you have a permit for that animal?" I blinked. "Permit? He's my daughter's dog." Her lips pursed. "All residents must register pets with the HOA. There are strict weight limits, and I believe golden retrievers are above the threshold." I laughed in disbelief. "He's not even mine. He's visiting for the day." "That's not the point," she snapped. "He's on your property, which means he's under your responsibility. I'll be issuing a violation." I felt my jaw tighten. For what? Playing fetch with my grandkid's dog? "Rules are rules," she repeated, that same smug smile plastered on her face. Something inside me cracked. I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to shout. For weeks, I'd swallowed her pettiness. But this was too far. As she turned to walk away, I called after her. "You know, Karen, maybe the problem isn't the rules. Maybe it's the way you enjoy enforcing them." She froze, her back stiff. Slowly, she looked over her shoulder, her eyes glinting. "Careful, David," she said softly. "You don't want to make enemies in this neighborhood." And then she walked off, leaving a silence so heavy it pressed on my chest. That night, I lay awake again, staring at the ceiling fan spinning lazily above me. Her words echoed in my head. "You don't want to make enemies." It wasn't just a warning. It was a threat. And for the first time, I wondered just how far Karen would go to keep her throne. Have you ever dealt with someone who turned rules into weapons? What would you do if your neighbor started treating you like an enemy? Share your thoughts below. I'd love to hear. You can live with annoyances. A barking dog, a nosy neighbor, even a few unfair fines. But when someone makes it their mission to destroy your peace, that's when annoyance turns into war. And Karen was ready for war. It began with the mailbox. Remember how she made me repaint it black? Well, 2 weeks later, I woke up to find the mailbox door bent at an odd angle, dented, like someone had kicked it. At first, I thought maybe it was kids messing around. But then I noticed something else. The dent was neat, precise, like the heel of a pointed shoe. And if anyone in Maplewood was known for strutting around in sharp little heels, well, you can guess who came to mind. I fixed it myself, hammered it straight, touched up the paint. No big deal. But 3 nights later, it happened again. Same dent, same heel mark. Coincidence? Not a chance. The next blow came with the mail itself. I started noticing envelopes missing, bills delayed. Even a birthday card from my sister never showed up. At first, I blamed the postal service. But then one evening, as I returned from the grocery store, I caught a glimpse of something in Karen's hands, a bundle of letters. My letters before she quickly shoved them into her clipboard. When she noticed me staring, she smiled, waved, and hurried into her house. I stood there on the sidewalk, my blood running cold. Was she tampering with my mail? That wasn't just petty, that was a federal crime. I considered calling the police right then, but I hesitated. What if I was wrong? What if she had a perfectly innocent explanation? Still, the doubt lingered like a bitter taste in my mouth. And then, the real sabotage began. One afternoon, I returned from a doctor's appointment to find a bright orange sticker slapped on my front door. Notice of HOA fine, unauthorized construction. I ripped it off, fuming. Construction? I hadn't built anything. The only project I'd done was fixing a loose shutter. At the bottom of the notice, in bold, it read, "Fine, $200, payable within 14 days. I stormed to the HOA office, really just a small meeting room in the clubhouse, and demanded an explanation. Karen was there, of course, sitting at the head of the table like a queen holding court. "David," she said smoothly, "it's been brought to our attention that you made unauthorized alterations to your home's exterior." "What alterations?" I snapped. "All I did was tighten a hinge on a shutter." Her smile widened. "That counts as exterior modification. Per Rule 7C, any alteration requires prior approval from the board." I stared at her in disbelief. "You're fining me for fixing a shutter?" "Rules are rules," she said, her voice sing-song sweet. "Perhaps next time you'll remember to file the proper paperwork." The other board members sat silent, eyes lowered, as if they didn't dare oppose her. That's when I realized this wasn't just about control. This was about power, and Karen was drunk on it. I paid the fine, but it left a sour taste. Not because of the money, but because of the principle. And then came the final straw. It was a chilly Saturday morning. I was raking leaves when I noticed something odd. A bright yellow notice staked in my yard. Curious, I walked over and read the bold print: "Foreclosure warning property in violation of HOA standards." My heart nearly stopped. Foreclosure? I yanked the notice from the ground, my hands shaking. It wasn't from the county or a bank. It was on HOA letterhead, and it claimed that because of my repeated violations, the HOA had the right to initiate foreclosure proceedings if I failed to pay accumulated fines. Accumulated fines? I rushed inside, dug through my drawer, and counted. Trash cans, mailbox, dog, lights, flowers, shutter. Added up, the fines came to nearly $2,000. My face burned with fury. This wasn't enforcement. This wasn't about rules. This was targeted harassment, systematic, deliberate, and malicious. That evening, I marched to Karen's house. I knocked hard enough to rattle the glass. She opened the door slowly, her lips already curled into that smug little smile. "David," she purred, "can I help you?" I shoved the notice toward her. "Care to explain this?" She glanced at it, unfazed. "Ah, yes. Standard procedure. Multiple violations can result in foreclosure. You should have read the handbook." "You can't take my home because of a few fines," I shouted. "That's insane." Her eyes glittered, cold and calculating. "I don't make the rules, David. I just enforce them." I leaned closer, my voice trembling with anger. "You're not enforcing. You're targeting me." Her smile didn't waver. "Prove it." Those two words cut deeper than anything else. Prove it. She knew exactly what she was doing, and she knew I didn't have evidence. I stormed back home, my mind racing. For the first time, I felt something stronger than frustration, stronger than anger. Resolve. Karen had crossed the line. She wasn't just a nuisance anymore. She was a threat to my home, my peace, my life. And if she thought I was going to roll over and let her bulldoze me, she had another thing coming. Because I was done playing defense. The war had officially begun. Have you ever been pushed so far that you had no choice but to fight back? If you were in my shoes, would you take her head on or start gathering evidence quietly? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm curious what you'd do. There's a point in every fight where you realize brute force won't win. You have to be smarter, quieter, patient enough to let your opponent reveal their own weaknesses. That's where I was with Karen. The foreclosure threat had lit a fire under me, but I knew charging into her kingdom, fists swinging, would only backfire. She thrived on confrontation. She loved it when I lost my temper. It fed her narrative: David's difficult, David's disruptive, David's the problem. So I decided to change the script. The first step was simple: document everything. I bought a thick leather-bound journal and set it on my kitchen counter. Every time I received a notice, every time Karen knocked on my door, every suspicious glance or remark, I wrote it down. Dates, times, exact words. My journal became a logbook of harassment, a trail she didn't know I was keeping. But I needed more than words. I needed proof. That's when I invested in cameras. Nothing fancy, just a few motion-activated security cameras I mounted discreetly around the house, one above the front door, one facing the mailbox, one angled toward the side yard. If Karen wanted to keep prowling around like a hawk, then let her. I'd be watching back. The first week, nothing happened. just squirrels darting across the yard and kids riding bikes. But then, one night around midnight, the camera caught her. Karen, heels clicking softly against the pavement, clipboard tucked under her arm, walking up to my yard. She crouched by my mailbox, tugged at the door, then stood back and scribbled something onto her clipboard. The next morning, I found another notice. Mailbox non-compliant. But this time, I wasn't helpless. I had video evidence. I sat at my dining table, laptop open, replaying the footage over and over. Each time I watched, my anger hardened into something sharper. This wasn't just pettiness anymore, this was stalking. Still, I knew not to rush. Evidence was only useful if you built enough of it, so I waited. And Karen kept giving me material. A week later, she marched right onto my lawn, pulled out a measuring tape, and began measuring the height of my grass. When the camera caught her frowning, writing on her clipboard, I almost laughed. Another time, she reached over my fence and yanked out the solar lights I'd tucked away in the garden bed. She tossed them onto the sidewalk and wall. Each act went into my growing file. But I wasn't alone in this fight. Quietly, I started talking to neighbors. Not publicly, not in meetings, just one-on-one conversations during morning walks or evening chats at the mailbox. Linda, the woman 2 doors down, was the first to open up. She fined me for planting roses, she confessed one evening. Said the color clashed with community standards. I had to dig them up. Her eyes welled with frustration. Then there was Jim, a retired veteran across the street. He shook his head, voice low. She tried to have my flag taken down, said it was too large for the pole. I told her she'd have to pry it from my hands. One by one, the stories poured in. A young couple fined for leaving a stroller on their porch. An elderly widow threatened over her Christmas decorations. A family accused of violating noise ordinances because their children played basketball in the driveway. It became clear. Karen's reign wasn't just over me, it was over everyone. But fear kept them quiet. Don't go after her, Jim warned. She'll make your life hell. She's got the board in her pocket. I nodded. But inside, my resolve only strengthened. Maybe the others couldn't fight. Maybe they were too tired or too scared. But I could. The turning point came at an HOA meeting. The clubhouse was packed, folding chairs creaking under the weight of weary neighbors. Karen sat at the front, pearls gleaming, gavel in hand. She called the meeting to order with her usual smug confidence. Then came the agenda. Landscaping violations, parking enforcement, new budget proposals. Same old routine. But halfway through, I raised my hand. Point of order, I said calmly. Karen's eyes flicked to me, wary. Yes, David? I stood, journal in hand. I'd like to ask the board to explain how they're enforcing rules. Specifically, why some residents seem to be targeted while others are not. A murmur rippled through the room. Karen's smile tightened. Rules apply equally to everyone. If you feel singled out, perhaps it's because you violated them more often. I flipped open my journal. Funny, because according to my records, I've received over a dozen notices in less than 2 months, while my neighbors report almost none. And yet, I have footage showing you trespassing on my property at midnight, tampering with my mailbox. The room went silent. Karen's eyes widened for just a second before she regained her composure. That's a serious accusation. I held her gaze. Not an accusation, a fact. And I have video proof. The murmurs grew louder now, neighbors shifting, whispering, glancing at each other with raised eyebrows. Karen banged the gavel. Order! This is not the time or place for baseless claims. But the damage was done. I saw it in their faces. Doubt. For the first time, Karen wasn't untouchable. That night, as I walked home under the glow of the streetlights, I felt something I hadn't in weeks. Hope. For the first time, the battle lines weren't just between Karen and me. The neighborhood was beginning to stir. And I knew it was only a matter of time before Karen slipped up again. And when she did, I'd be ready. If you were keeping a secret file on a bully like Karen, what would you include first? Video evidence, witness statements, or legal advice? I'm curious what strategy you'd take. Every tyrant looks untouchable until the first crack appears. And with Karen, that crack had started to show. After the HOA meeting where I'd revealed the video of her trespassing, the neighborhood changed. Not overnight, not dramatically, but I could feel it in the air. like a shift in the weather before a storm. Neighbors who used to avoid eye contact suddenly gave me nods of quiet solidarity. A few even whispered encouragement when Karen wasn't looking. It wasn't open rebellion, but it was something. Karen, however, doubled down. The very next week, I received 3 new violation notices. One claimed my blinds weren't uniform in appearance. Another accused me of leaving a hazardous object on my porch, an empty watering can. And the third? A fine for excessive leaf debris on my lawn. In the middle of fall. It was absurd. Laughable, almost. But behind the humor was something dangerous. Desperation. Karen had felt her power slip, and now she was scrambling to tighten her grip. But the more she tried, the more people began to see her for what she was. Take Linda, for instance. She came over one afternoon, clutching a folded letter. "She fined me again," she whispered, "for having a birdbath. Said it attracts pests." Her voice trembled with anger. "I've had that birdbath for 10 years. I opened the letter. Same boilerplate language, same threats of escalating fines. I looked Linda in the eyes and said, "You're not alone anymore. Keep this. I'm building a file." Word spread quietly after that. One by one, neighbors slipped me their letters, their stories. Some slid envelopes under my door. Others whispered in passing. My journal turned into a dossier, pages and pages of evidence that Karen's so-called rule enforcement was nothing more than a reign of terror. And yet, Karen carried herself like nothing had changed. She strutted down sidewalks, heels clicking, pearls glinting in the sun, clipboard at the ready. But if you watched closely, you could see the flicker in her eyes, the tightness in her smile. The Queen was rattled. Things came to a head at the next board meeting. The clubhouse was fuller than usual, the air thick with anticipation. I sat near the back, journal in my lap, while Karen called the meeting to order. She launched into her usual monologue about maintaining community standards and protecting property values. But this time, the room didn't sit quietly. "Why are we being fined for things that were never issues before?" a young mother asked, her voice trembling but firm. Karen froze for half a second before pasting on her smile. "We've always had these standards. Perhaps enforcement was lax in the past, but under my leadership, we are maintaining excellence." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Jim, the retired veteran, raised his hand. "Excellence? My American flag is excellence, and you threatened to fine me for it. Care to explain?" Karen's jaw tightened. "Flags must be regulation size. Yours exceeds." "That flag was carried in combat," Jim barked, his voice booming. "You going to tell me that's not worthy of this neighborhood?" The room erupted in murmurs, some clapping softly. Karen banged her gavel, her cheeks flushed. "Order! Order!" But the cracks were widening. Neighbors who'd stayed silent for years were finding their voices. Questions poured in about fines, about missing funds in the budget, about why Karen always pushed for contracts with her cousin's landscaping company. For the first time, she wasn't in complete control. I sat back, watching, hiding a small smile. The tide was turning, but Karen wasn't about to surrender. 2 days later, I woke up to find my car splattered with paint, bright red streaks running down the hood like blood. My stomach dropped. Coincidence? Vandalism? Or something more sinister? I checked the camera footage, and there she was. Karen, in the dead of night, a scarf over her hair, clutching a can of spray paint. She looked around nervously, then crouched by my car, shaking the can. The hiss of paint filled the speakers, followed by her quick retreat into the darkness. I sat back in my chair, my heart pounding. She'd crossed a new line: criminal property damage. This wasn't petty fines or mailbox dents. This was malicious, deliberate destruction. The next morning, I didn't wash the paint. I left it there for all the neighbors to see. And sure enough, they did. Every person who walked by stopped, gasped, shook their head. "Karen?" one whispered. "Ich schwöre, I've got footage." Word spread like wildfire. By evening, whispers had turned into open talk. Groups of neighbors huddled on sidewalks, pointing toward Karen's house. The Queen's crown was slipping faster now, and everyone could see it. That night, Linda knocked on my door. "She's losing control," she said quietly. "People are scared, but they're ready for change." I nodded. My file of evidence was thick. My cameras had caught enough to bury her, and the neighbors, once cowed, were beginning to stand. Karen thought she was untouchable, but soon she'd learn the hard way. No throne lasts forever, because once the cracks in the crown spread wide enough, the whole thing comes crashing down. If your HOA president vandalized your property, would you call the police immediately or hold back and use it as leverage? What would you do? Let me know in the comments. I want to see where you stand. Every war has a final battle. With Karen, I knew it was coming. The vandalism wasn't just a cheap act of malice, it was a desperate move by someone who felt the ground crumbling under her heels. And I was done waiting. I'd spent weeks gathering evidence, violation letters, budget inconsistencies, neighbors' testimonies, and most damning of all, camera footage of Karen trespassing and vandalizing my car. The file was thick enough to snap a binder ring. But evidence alone doesn't topple a tyrant. You need timing. You need an audience. And Karen herself had given me the perfect stage, the quarterly HOA General Assembly. Unlike the smaller board meetings, the General Assembly pulled in nearly every homeowner. It was where budgets were reviewed, elections discussed, and grievances aired. If I was going to break Karen's stranglehold, it had to be there out in the open, with every pair of eyes watching. The night of the assembly, the clubhouse was buzzing. People packed into folding chairs, murmuring in low voices. Some glanced at me, nodding quietly. Others avoided Karen's gaze as she swept into the room, pearls around her neck, gavel in hand, smile tight as piano wire. She banged the gavel. Order, everyone. We'll begin. The meeting started as usual, approval of minutes, budget review, routine nonsense. Karen's voice carried with false confidence, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. She knew the neighborhood was restless. When she called for community concerns, my hand shot up. She hesitated, just for a flicker, then forced a smile. Yes, Mr. Thompson, you have the floor. I stood, my journal tucked under my arm, a flash drive in my pocket. My voice was calm, steady. Thank you, Madam President. I've noticed a pattern of selective enforcement in this community, and I believe the homeowners deserve transparency. A murmur rippled through the room. Karen's smile faltered. That's quite an accusation. Do you have proof? I clicked the remote I'd borrowed from the clubhouse projector. The screen flickered to life, and then, there she was. Karen, caught in grainy black and white footage, crouching by my car in the dead of night, spray painting the hood. The hiss of the can echoed through the speakers. Gasps filled the room. Karen shot up from her chair. This is fake. Fabricated. I didn't flinch. I have more. Click. Another video. Karen slipping into Linda's yard, clipboard in hand, snapping pictures of her birdbath. Click. Karen standing in front of Jim's flagpole, scribbling furiously, her face twisted with disdain. Click. A spreadsheet of HOA funds highlighting landscaping expenses paid directly to her cousin's company at triple the market rate. The room erupted. Voices shouted. She did what? That's theft. We've been paying for this? Karen slammed the gavel. Order. Order. This is a smear campaign. But no one was listening anymore. Linda stood up, trembling but firm. She fined me for flowers. Flowers. And now we see she's been stealing from us? Jim's voice boomed. You disrespected my flag, and you think you can lecture us about community pride? You're finished, Karen. Neighbors who had been silent for years now shouted from the back rows. One waved a stack of violation notices. Another yelled about missing pool funds. It was chaos, but chaos aimed squarely at her. Karen's face turned red, her composure cracking. You're all ungrateful. Without me, this neighborhood would fall apart. I kept your property values high. I made this place respectable. I stepped closer to the front. Respect doesn't come from fear, Karen. It comes from trust. And you lost that a long time ago. The gavel slipped from her hand, clattering against the table. For a moment, she looked small, exposed. Then she snapped. You'll regret this, she shrieked, pointing at me with a trembling finger. All of you. You think you can run this neighborhood without me? You're nothing without me. But her words only fueled the crowd. People surged forward, not physically but vocally. Demands for resignation filled the air, calls for a vote, cries for the police. The board members, usually her lapdogs, exchanged nervous glances. Finally, one cleared his throat. Given the evidence presented, I moved to suspend Karen pending investigation. The room exploded in applause. Karen's eyes darted wildly. She clutched her pearls, breathing hard, and then stormed out, her heels clicking furiously against the tile. The door slammed behind her. For the first time in years, the room was free of her shadow. I sat back down, heart racing, hands trembling slightly. Not from fear, but from relief. The queen had fallen, but I knew better than to celebrate too soon. People like Karen don't go quietly, and I had a feeling she wasn't done yet. Still, that night, as neighbors clapped me on the back and thanked me, I allowed myself a rare smile. The breaking point had come, and Karen had shattered. Have you ever witnessed someone in power completely lose control when the truth came out? What happened? Share your story in the comments. I bet a lot of us have seen a Karen fall from grace. The night of the assembly felt like a victory. For the first time in years, I slept without that gnawing tension in my chest. Karen had been suspended. Neighbors were finally speaking up, and for one sweet moment, I believed the worst was behind us. But tyrants rarely leave quietly. 3 days later, a letter arrived in my mailbox, this time not from the HOA, but from a law firm. Karen was suing me for defamation. I remember standing at my kitchen counter, coffee going cold in my hands, staring at the thick envelope. She had the audacity to claim I had orchestrated a campaign of lies against her, that the footage was doctored, that the financial discrepancies were clerical errors. My first instinct was rage. My second was doubt. Lawsuits aren't cheap. Even if the case was baseless, defending myself would bleed me dry. But then I thought of her face when the projector exposed her, the fear behind the fury. This was her last card, a desperate bluff to scare me into silence. I wasn't folding. Karen's retaliation didn't stop at the courthouse. Neighbors whispered about her showing up outside their homes late at night, yelling at anyone who had spoken against her. Linda called me in tears one morning. Karen had left a dead bouquet of flowers on her porch with a note, "This is what happens to traitors." Jim found a nail in each of his car tires within a week of the meeting. Coincidence? Maybe, but no one believed it. Even the board members who had finally turned on her received venom. Karen plastered anonymous flyers around the neighborhood, accusing them of being conspirators in some fabricated scheme to oust her. She stood in the cul-de-sac one Saturday afternoon, screaming at anyone who would listen that she was the victim of a witch hunt. For a woman who had once ruled with fear, she had now become a spectacle. But spectacles are dangerous when cornered. The lawsuit weighed on me. Courtrooms are strange places. They don't run on truth alone, but on what can be proven, argued, and twisted. Karen's lawyer tried every trick in the book, claiming the camera footage was inadmissible, insisting the financial records were incomplete, painting Karen as a dedicated volunteer slandered by an ungrateful neighbor. But I had my binder, my witnesses, my neighbors who stood by me. When Linda took the stand, her voice shook, but her words were firm. She fined me for flowers while lining her own pockets. Jim was blunt as ever. She disrespected my flag. She disrespected all of us. That's not leadership. And when the footage played in court, Karen's lawyer objected, shouted, tried to stall, but the judge leaned forward, eyes narrowing at the screen. "That looks an awful lot like your client." Karen sat rigid, jaw clenched, eyes boring into me as if she could burn a hole through my chest. In the end, the court dismissed her defamation suit. Not only that, the judge recommended a formal audit of the HOA's finances. It should have been the end, but Karen wasn't built to accept endings. After the lawsuit collapsed, Karen became a ghost that wouldn't leave. She stopped showing up at meetings but lingered at the edges of the neighborhood. Neighbors spotted her parked at the entrance, watching from her car. Packages started disappearing from porches. One evening, I caught her standing at the edge of my driveway, just staring, before she darted away into the night. People began to whisper that she was unraveling, that without her crown, she didn't know who she was anymore. And yet, even as her grip on the neighborhood slipped, I felt no peace. Because the thing about a person like Karen, they only leave when forced. The board, shaken by the lawsuit and mounting pressure, finally called for a full community election. For the first time in years, homeowners would get to choose new leadership. I wasn't running. I had no desire to sit in that cursed chair at the head of the table, but I made it my mission to ensure someone honest did. The night of the election, the clubhouse was packed again. Karen wasn't allowed in pending the audit, but her presence lingered in every hushed conversation. Linda won a seat. Jim did too. Fresh faces filled the rest. The neighborhood erupted in applause, not because power had changed hands, but because it finally felt like ours again. Walking home that night, the air felt lighter. Kids laughed in the park again. Porch lights glowed warm instead of dim. The community was healing. But I couldn't shake the unease. Because Karen wasn't gone. Not really. She was still there, in the shadows, watching. And I knew somewhere deep in my gut that she wasn't done fighting. Have you ever dealt with someone who refused to let go of power, even after they lost it? How did they keep trying to fight back? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. The air in Maplewood felt electric that morning. For weeks, whispers had filled the neighborhood about the upcoming HOA audit. Even Karen, now mostly absent from community life, seemed to sense that her time of invincibility was over. I sat on my porch, sipping coffee, eyes scanning the street. Children played in the park, neighbors waved to each other, and for the first time in months, the cul-de-sac felt alive instead of tense. But the calm was deceptive. Karen had a way of lurking in the shadows, a presence that made even the brightest day feel like a gray one. The auditor arrived promptly at 9. A young woman in crisp business attire, clipboard in hand. She began with a polite smile. "I'll need access to all HOA financial records for the last 3 years," she said. Karen, predictably, tried to interfere. She appeared at the office door, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. "This is unnecessary," she said sharply. "Everything is in order. You won't find anything." The auditor ignored her and began work. I watched from a distance as the truth unfolded. Receipts, invoices, and contracts that Karen had manipulated everything was laid bare. Payments to her cousin's landscaping company, marked as community maintenance, were far higher than any other bids. Funds that should have gone toward pool maintenance, clubhouse repairs, and even children's programs had mysteriously disappeared. The auditor's pen scratched across the paper. "This is significant," she murmured. Word spread quickly. Neighbors gathered outside the office, murmuring in disbelief. Some held letters and notices they had kept. Others pointed toward invoices. The stories I had collected, along with the evidence, formed a damning mosaic. Karen, sensing the tide turning, tried to defend herself. "This is all clerical errors, misunderstandings. You're being unfair." Her voice was shrill, desperate. The poised queen we once knew was cracking before our eyes. The auditor didn't reply. She merely shook her head. "The discrepancies are too large to ignore. This will be referred to legal authorities." For the first time, Karen's facade broke completely. Her pearls slipped from her neck as she staggered back. I could see the panic in her eyes, the recognition that she was no longer untouchable. Neighbors began whispering openly, shaking their heads. "Finally," someone muttered, "she's getting what she deserves." By mid-afternoon, official notices were posted. Karen had been removed from the HOA board, suspended pending legal review, and the community would hold elections immediately to fill her seat. The message was clear: her reign was over. I walked through the neighborhood that evening, and for the first time, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. Children's laughter echoed freely, dogs barked without fear, and neighbors stopped to smile or wave. Maplewood was healing. Even Karen didn't resist quietly. Word spread that she had moved into a small apartment far from the neighborhood, forced out by legal consequences and mounting pressure. No more patrols, no more fines. No more tyrant looming over our homes. And as I watched the sunset over my yard, I realized something. Victory wasn't just about winning against Karen. It was about reclaiming the community. We had almost lost the sense of trust, respect, and solidarity that had been suffocated by one person's obsession with power. I thought back to the first notice she'd left on my door. The petty fines, the trespassing, the harassment. The journey had been exhausting, infuriating, and at times, terrifying. But it had also revealed something important. Courage isn't just about facing the world when everything is easy. Courage is standing up when the odds are stacked against you. when the system seems rigged, and when everyone else is too scared to act. Maplewood had found its courage, and Karen's empire of fear had crumbled under the weight of truth. That night, as I tucked my journal away and closed the front door, I felt a quiet satisfaction. Not vengeance, not malice, but justice. And justice, I realized, was sweeter when it was clean, legal, and shared by an entire community. The war was over, the neighborhood was safe, and Karen, finally, was gone. If you enjoyed this story of HOA justice and community triumph, don't forget to subscribe for more tales where ordinary people stand up against bullies and win. And let me know in the comments, have you ever faced a Karen in your neighborhood? How did it end?